Hello, everyone, and good afternoon, and welcome back to another author interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia. Maybe you know me as the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill. And today we are joined by a returning Wandering Scribe alumni. Now, if you have met this guest before or seen him elsewhere, he's an incredible author. Many of you probably know him for his Sorcery for Beginners series. But in this episode, viewers and listeners, we're going to be talking about several new projects this incredible guest has been working on since the last time we had him on the show. And stay tuned for a very special announcement towards the end of the interview. It's something you don't want to miss. And I'm so excited to have him here back on the show. So without further ado, let's give a huge round of applause to my good friend and fellow author, Matt Harry. Matt, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thank you so much for having me back on, Gabe. It's great to be back.
Awesome, Matt. So excited to have you back on the show now. Before we dive into some of the new projects you've been working on, would like to share with the viewers what you've been up to since the last time you were on the show.
Yeah, I have kind of been cranking away on new novel projects. Last year, I published the third book in my Sorcery for Beginners series, Time Travel for Beginners. And that was super fun to work on. It was like a chance to kind of put everything I'd always wanted to see in time travel projects into a book. And then this year, and on May 4th, I'm publishing my first adult, like official novel for adults. I mean, I know a lot of adults read my Sorcery for Beginners books, but those are obviously geared, towards, like, I always say ages 8 and up. And so this new novel is a dystopian detective novel. It's sci-fi
Ooh,
mystery.
nice. Very, very nice. And as a little teaser for our viewers and listeners, what are some other new projects that you are working on? I know we mentioned or talked about off camera that you've been working on a few new projects, one of which is coming out in a few months.
hmm Yeah, so I'm doing a podcast with my friend Jessica Mason, who I think you know as well.
Mhm.
We've met at Festival of Books. And Jesse writes the Mary Shelley School for Monsters comics, and I wrote Cryptozoology for Beginners. And so we were tabling together at LA Times Comic Con last summer. And she said,
Mhm.
I have this idea for a podcast. It's called Monster v. Monster, about, like, people pick their favorite monsters and they fight against each other. And I immediately started riffing on that and saying, like, well, yeah, that'd be great, but you should do it like an actual play podcast where, like, you actually roll dice and have the monsters fight. And she's like, I don't know what that is. What's actual play? And I started telling her about it. And she's like, I think you're co-hosting this podcast with me now. And I was like, oh, really? I'd love to. And so we have started recording that. It's probably going to be launching in May. And we are trying to bank a bunch of episodes. So we've done about 8 so far. We're trying to get at least 12 episodes banked before we do it. But it's really, really fun. It's basically like we bring somebody on, usually a creative person, and we ask them about their favorite monster. Why do they like it? And then Jesse comes up with a monster to fight that monster. And then I kind of am like the game master, and we have a little scenario that we do that we end it with. And it's always super fun. And it's great to see, like, Jesse didn't know anything about D&D or anything kind of really before
Mhm.
we started, and she's super into it now. She,
Yes, that sounds amazing.
yeah.
And for the viewers and listeners who remember that name, she is also a Wandering Scribe alumni on the show. And in addition to her Mary Shelley book, she is also the author of the Plastic Girls series,
Mhm.
which I also just recorded a video on it not too long ago. So make sure to go and check that out as well. But that's incredible, man. I'm so glad you're working on so many new projects with some really good friends of ours. So, let's dive into some of your upcoming books, which I'm very, very excited to dive deep into. Now, as a little teaser, I know you mentioned the detective book,
Mhm.
but correct me if I'm wrong, is there another project that you also have in the works, or is that the main one that you're focusing on right now?
That's the main one I'm focusing on right now. It's called Ashland. And again, it comes out in May. So I'm like kind of deep in the marketing publicity aspect for it. And then I have a couple other projects I'm working on in various stages of development. Like I have a sci-fi, a supernatural detective book that I just kind of finished that I'm going to be sending out for publication. And then I just finished a first draft of like a sci-fi family action story that I need readers on. So
Mm,
those two are probably going to be the next couple things that you see, but probably
mhm.
not till 2027 at least
Okay.
on one of those.
All right. So let's dive into a little peek into Ashland and see a little bit about that. Now, I do have some fan questions, Matt, that I'm going to be asking you throughout the interview, and they may border on spoiler. So feel free to give as much or as little as you like. So I guess as a starting point, Matt, let's start at the very beginning. What inspired you to write Ashland? What really sparked that creative interest?
Yeah, so this was basically my pandemic novel, for better or for worse. I was like everybody else, March of 2020, everything was shut down. I was working out of the house. My wife was working out of the house. Our kids were doing school over Zoom. So, like, we were all trapped in the house. And I would try to leave at least once a day just to get out of the house. And I'd be walking through these empty streets in Los Angeles, looking around, like, asking myself, how could this be worse? And I'm a big outdoors person. I like to say nature is my church. And so I thought immediately after I had that question, like, what if we never went outside again? Like, what if there was something that kept us from like, that was like trapping us inside the
Mm,
house? And so that question started spiraling. Like, obviously, it was like, oh, kind of a way to make myself feel better because the COVID thing was obviously very scary. But I was like,
yes.
well, let me imagine a worse scenario. So at least my day to day doesn't seem as bad. And so I went through a lot of iterations actually, because I don't often start projects that way with like a world. I often start with like a plot or, like some kind of problem. And so I spent a lot of time trying to figure out, first of all, what is this thing that is trapping everybody inside? And I did a lot of research. I was like, well, I don't want to do a virus because we're obviously dealing with that right now. Is it nanotechnology? Is it an alien something? I talked to my cousin is an infectious disease doctor. So I was like, is it a bacteria? I talked to a roboticist, like, could it be a robot? And eventually I came across these things that are real called xenobots, which are like
Mm,
organic kind of little small organisms that are programmed to do a specific task. Kind of like, white blood cells will go through and they'll fight disease.
right.
Scientists can program these things and they can self-replicate. And so they're thinking of using them to like do things like deliver drugs or fight cancer. And I immediately thought, being a writer, what if they got the programming wrong? And so they invent this thing to fight cancer, but it targets muscle proteins instead. So it basically
Oh
is like a flesh-eating
no.
thing that can self-replicate.
That is terrifying. Absolutely
Yeah.
terrifying. And actually, I don't know why, but it kind of reminds me of another book from another author, Brian Fitzpatrick, for Metcraft, where it's like
Oh
an
yeah.
organism that was in people. Granted, it's not flesh-eating bacteria or flesh-eating or self-replicating, but it's still an entity that's within you that's kind of unnerving. But oh my gosh, I can't even imagine what that must have been like, man. Just trying to write something that was like, oh, that's a very, very close to home. But that's probably the most exciting part about being a writer. As you just mentioned, and you talk to everyone, you want to make it sound as accurate as possible. Like, if this happened, what would have been the most likely outcome? So once you had that idea, Matt, did you go about planning it out in an outline, or would you consider yourself, for this book in particular, a more spontaneous writer, a pantser?
Yeah. It's always a good question. And I wish I was one or the other. I feel like I kind of am in a middle ground because again, so I figured out what this thing was that was kind of keeping people inside, but I wasn't sure what kind of story to tell right off the bat. At first I was like, is it a romance story about like someone who falls in love with somebody they meet online, but they can't go outside? Then it was like, is it a political thriller? Is it an action thing? And then finally I had the idea of like, well, maybe it should be a mystery because if you can't go outside and you're a detective investigating, crime, that's really going to limit you. How are you going to collect evidence? How are you going to interview people? And so yeah, I tried to keep it very grounded with real stuff. So like there's all these things that I kind of had to invent once I had that scenario. And once I knew it was a mystery, it's like, all right, I need a crime. So I need to have someone get murdered, and then I need to have, clues and suspects and things along the way. So I did have a rough outline, but my outlines tend to be kind of like rough skeletons. So
Mm,
like I'll have a kind of a sense of like they're going to talk to this person's a suspect, this is a clue. But then as I write, I try to leave room for details and discovering things and stuff like that. So I actually didn't 100% know because I had like three people at the end that it could have kind of all been. And I wasn't sure until I got to the end which one I really wanted. And it's kind of like that
mm.
character almost like stepped forward and said, like, yeah, I did it. And I was like, oh, great, you did it. So then I obviously went back and set that up and threw suspicion on other people and stuff like that.
Absolutely, Matt. Absolutely. So now let's actually dive into our first fan question of the interview. One of my viewers would like to know, they actually had a chance to watch your previous interview on the show,
Oh, nice.
and they ask, with, of course, your Searching for Beginner series, and now you just mentioned, the podcast and your upcoming book, Ashland, how do you balance everything to give enough time to each and not feel overwhelmed?
Yeah, that's such a great question. It's what I'm always asking myself. I think, for me, I kind of like think of like pots on a stove. Like if you're making Thanksgiving dinner, you're kind of cooking everything at the same time, but you have to kind of prioritize which thing is getting cooked when. Like if I put the turkey in last, the turkey's not going to be done. So I got to do the turkey first. And then while the turkey's cooking, I can be doing something else. Um, and for me, it's kind of like there's a combination of which thing do I owe to somebody? So, like, if I've signed a contract, if somebody's waiting on something, if I'm on a deadline, obviously that's got to come first. Um, and then it's kind of like, what thing am I most inspired by at the time? So I always have
Mm,
this. I feel like I always have like one project that is like my primary project. Like that's the thing I'm currently really excited by. I'm in the middle of a draft. I'm figuring it out. And then at the same time, I've got two or three other things that I'm doing maybe editing on, or it's out on submission to somebody, or whatever it is, I'm doing marketing on it. But I feel like there's always like that. I really just have like one primary thing that I'm really creating. And the tricky thing is when I finish that process, like I just did about a week ago, I always have like a 2 or 3 week period when it's like I have a bunch of other things I could be like starting as my primary, but I really have to, I'm like not sure. I have to fall in love
right.
with it. And so that's always like a weird time for me.
Absolutely. I'm very much the same way. I am currently working on my fifth book, completely again a new series. I never stick with just one series and just continue it. No, I have to work on a new series, but this series is very well. The first book in this new series is very special to me because it's a book that I attempted to write back in high school, and now getting a chance to fully flesh it out is something that I'm really, really excited about and can't wait to share. And that's probably, like, I want to say maybe 70% is already written. I just got to fill in the last 30%.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's probably going to be out sometime later this year, which I cannot wait, because that's another thing is we're going to talk about later is as we work on so many new projects, we're always finding new things about ourselves and always learning like what genres we thought we could never write in, we actually are very passionate about, which leads into a very special fan question, which is completely new. I've never gotten this before. One of my viewers would like to know, out of all the books that you have written and have or will write in the future, what is the one genre that you think you would have the most fun writing in?
Mm. That's such a good question too, because I feel like sometimes I avoid the genre that I love the most because I think as a fan of it, I know how hard it is to get right. And
Hmm.
so I love sci-fi. Like my wife and I have a joke that like she's always like says every all sci-fi is depressing sci-fi to her because it's always about like the end of the world or killer robots. Um, but I avoided doing sci-fi for a long time. I was always doing kind of fantasy and magic. I think again because I didn't trust myself to get the science right. You know, like you
Mm,
read Andy Weir and Neil Stevenson and Isaac Asimov, all these people, it's like, wow, the science is really like locked in. And these were oftentimes people who had degrees, you know, in science. And my degrees are all in, you know, creative stuff. So I kind of avoided that for a long time. And then with Ashland, I was like, well, this is definitely sci-fi. Like it kind of starts present day and then it's 2 years in the future. So it's not super sci-fi, but I had to think of a lot of sci-fi stuff and I had to do kind of scientific research and read about things. And so that was very intimidating, but I was so glad I did it because it was so fun to write about all that stuff and kind of play those little games that I'm always doing anyway. I just had never really done it in a novel. So now doing that one, it kind of made me feel like, okay, I can do this. And so like I've got another sci-fi thing, like I mentioned, I'm working on. Um,
nice. Very, very nice, Matt. And now let's go into another question, which I think I may have asked you before, but I really want to hear if your response has changed to this question. And it's this notion of, as authors, we're always excited to tell new people about the projects we're working on, friends and family, always wanting to share. And when I've asked people on the show, especially people who are, first timers on the channel, this question is a very big eye opener because there is some hesitancy to tell people that, hey, I'm working on this new project or I'm an author, because depending on what kind of author you are, especially nowadays, there's a different response. Like if you say you're an author with Penguin Random House, everybody's going to be like, amazed and should. But if you tell someone that you are either a hybrid author, small press author, or a self published indie author, reaction is different depending on the person. So you've been writing books a lot longer than me and have found your audience and found your voice. But throughout your journey, Matt, when did you feel confident in yourself to claim ownership of, yeah, I am an author? And as a follow up to that, because I've also noticed this kind of discussion in the indie community. Do you think there is a difference between someone who calls himself a writer as opposed to calling themselves an author? Is there a difference between the two, or does one become the other?
that's interesting. I feel like myself personally, I still mostly refer to myself as a writer because I do a lot of different kinds of stories. Like I've also written plays and I'm still very active writing screenplays and TV pilots and things like that. So I feel like that kind of covers everything that I do. Um, I I feel like I have called myself an author. There's definitely that like imposter syndrome that always creeps in of like you tell someone you're an author and they're like, "Oh, what have you written?" You know, and it's like
Right.
they think author, they think Stephen King, James Patterson, like a name you recognize. So that's always, you know, you always feel like a little bit your confidence shaken. But I feel like, you know, nowadays it's like if you even put something online, like it has really flipped in the time I started. Like when I was first querying back in 2015 with Sorcery for Beginners, which is my first published novel,
Mm-hmm.
everyone was saying, don't self-publish it first. Self-publishing is like they're off to here. No one wants to acknowledge them. And within 10 years, that has completely flipped, where now you're seeing
Absolutely.
people get signed and getting major deals with Penguin Random House because they self-published and have an established audience. So that's been amazing to see. Now I think it doesn't really matter. It's just like, what are you putting out? Do people like it? Like, look at Dungeon Crawler Carl. Like, he
Mm-hmm.
published that for free on Royal Road originally, and now he's like just minting, you know, these giant books and huge audiences. So I think that's great to see that that has flipped. And I think, you know, if you've written something, you're a writer. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
matter where it is. Doesn't matter if it's on a website. Doesn't matter if you self-published it. Like if you have people reading it and enjoying it, you're a writer. You're an author.
Absolutely, 100%. Very, very true, Matt. Now, these next fan questions may kind of border on spoiler. So, again, feel free to give as much or as little.
I love it.
Now, in Ashland, as again you mentioned before, it's going to be coming out in May. So, when writing Ashland, because it now is, sci fi, and you really kind of cracked, your take on the sci fi genre, do you have a favorite scene or moment
Mm.
from writing it? And that can also be one that you've enjoyed writing, or it can also be one that was just so nerve-wrackingly difficult, but you knew it was an essential part of the storytelling.
Yeah, that's really that's a good question because I feel like a lot of times some of the scenes that are probably the most fun to read are the hardest ones to write. I feel like for me, writing action, especially in a novel, is really tricky
Mm-hmm.
because it's like where is everything and how much am I gonna like make the language actiony but not too much that it's distracting. And so there was a scene in there, and it's not really a spoiler, but there's basically, so in this world in Los Angeles, everyone's been cooped up inside for 2 years, and everyone accomplishes everything by sending out drones. So like if I want to deliver something, deliver food, I'm going to send a drone. If I want to go talk to somebody, I'm
Out. So, as you were mentioning before, it talk about how in Los Angeles everyone's been cooped up for 2 years, and if anyone wants to have any form of contact, they send out drones. I think that's where you were leaving off.
right. So people are sending out these drones, but there's also a small group of people who are kind of illegal scavengers where they're putting on hazmat suits that are patched together and kind of going around and just stealing, picking up whatever they can find that's been left over to kind of help out their friends and family. So they're called scrappers. And so I knew once I invented that idea of like this group of scrappers, I wanted to have my main character, Kai Braddock, who's the detective who's also going outside to investigate, have a run in with them. And so I wanted to set it downtown Los Angeles. I could have lots of like iconic places. And there's this whole thing where he's trying to get back home, but they've literally blocked off the street with a bunch of cars. Like they've stacked up a bunch of cars. So it's kind of like he's in this giant maze. And then as he's like trying to drive and escape this maze, they're pushing cars off the roof of a parking garage on top of him, and he's having to like speed between them, and cars are crashing all around him. So that scene ended up being super fun, I think, to read, and it's very visual. But it took me so many drafts to get through that. It's probably the scene I rewrote the most in the entire book. Just trying to figure out like how much is too much. How, does this feel too much like a Jerry Bruckheimer action movie, like not
Mm.
realistic? Is the language confusing? So yeah, that's definitely one that comes to mind.
All right. And on this topic of characters, how did you make them feel authentic to the world that they exist in this futuristic Los Angeles? And do you have a favorite character out of all the characters that you've written?
Nice. Yeah, I mean, definitely one of the tricks I did for the main character, because I was already inventing this whole world and I was doing all this creative work, I was like, I got to make this easier on myself. So the main character is actually very close to me. He's different in a couple of different ways. I mean, he's middle-aged like I am. He's got two sons. He's different than me in that he's divorced. I'm not divorced. He is an ex-cop. And he's also way better at speaking his mind. Like he's been cooped up for 2 years. He will tell anybody what he thinks. So it's a really fun freedom to write a character like that. But every day I was writing this character and I had to be in this mindset of imagining what it would be to be divorced and be separate from my family. It was like really depressing to work on because I'd be, basically thinking of my life. Like, what would it be like if my wife and kids were in a different house? And the good thing is, I would come home every day so relieved that my family was still there. So it was oddly therapeutic in that way. But the other characters, what's really fun about this scenario is that everybody's a little bit stir crazy because they've all been cooped up for 2 years. So some of them I just were really fun to write, like really weird, icky villains. Like there's this one character who's like the CEO of a pharmaceutical company who is basically built a little harem for himself, and he's
Mm.
got all this amazing food. And he's got goats in a dome in the backyard, so he can like milk the goats and stuff. And that character's super gross, but it was very fun to write in like a James Bond villainy kind of way. Like this guy who's just like there's no one checking in on his behavior anymore, so he's just completely out of control.
Interesting. Interesting. Now, kind of going into more of what I have to call the reflective side, Matt, and gonna go more in depth on this one. It's this notion of, what does it mean to be an author in the digital age? Because as you mentioned earlier in the interview, 10, 20 years ago, everybody was against the idea of self-publishing. It's not going to get you anywhere. It's going to be, no one's going to know you. But, as time has gone on, a lot of people have gotten major publishing deals because they've been self-published. And with the rise of the internet and social media, that's also played a huge role as well. You have book talk, you have bookish communities, you have indie author communities. Jessica, Megan, myself, and many other authors that we have in our inner circles have used social media to build a platform, to build an awareness. And it's amazing. But on the other side, as I'm sure you'll definitely agree, social media and the internet does have a dark side. We leave ourselves exposed to the internet. And unfortunately, with the rise of AI, that has led to a lot of work being training programs illegally without our permission or consent. And in recent news, there are authors, some who have been respected, who have used AI to generate books uh, at a rate that's unheard of, which some have argued diminishes the art and practice of what it is to be an author. Coupled that with imposter syndrome, writer's block, people always expecting the next thing from you. It can be a lot on one's shoulders. So for you, Matt, in your career as not just an author, but also as a screenplay writer as well, what has still disciplined you and kept you centered, grounded, and focused on what you want to be as a creative person?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, definitely, I feel like I'm kind of befuddled by the AI for creativity stuff of it. I think there are some useful AI tools,
Mm,
particularly for things like research and things like that. Although
absolutely.
you still can't trust it for research.
Mhm.
I think I had AI do a summary of myself one time as an experiment, and it said I'd written 10 books instead of 6 books. And I was like, oh, I wish I'd written these books, but sorry, AI, it's not true. But I think for me, I don't understand the idea of like creatively outsourcing, because to me that's the fun of the process, is like creating something yourself and spending time with it. And when I was younger, I was always very ambitious. I always wanted to write, and I would send stuff off and I would get rejected a lot. And yet I found myself keep coming back to it. And when I was about 25, I had this realization, which was, you know what? I think this is just something I like to do. I just like to spend my time this way. I like coming up with stories, even if it's just for myself. Is that okay? And I kind of realized I think it is okay. Like if the worst case scenario is I die in 50 years and my kids find a bunch of boxes in the attic of unpublished stuff, at least I would have spent my time doing that. So this thing of like having something else write it for you, I just don't understand. And I worry that there's going to be a whole new generation of people who have not kind of learned, put those 10,000 hours in that they need to do to learn how to tell stories and stuff and do stuff creatively. So, I mean, for me, it's like I like doing it. That's what kind of gets me in the seat every day, is like I will start to feel itchy after a couple of days. Like if I go on vacation and I don't write for 3 days, I'll kind of go off to a coffee shop, even if I'm in Hawaii, and
Mhm.
just like write for a little bit. So I really like doing it. That's a good motivator. And then I think the other thing is I've gotten pretty good at trusting like the little voice inside me that tells me when something is not ready yet.
Right.
So I feel like that's important too. Like I've put 6 books out. I feel pretty good about all 6 of those books. And then there's other stuff. It's like I'm glad that hasn't gotten out yet because it's not
Right.
quite right.
Absolutely, 100%, Matt. And this kind of goes into another reflective question, which I would very much like to hear your thoughts on. And I'll give some context to this question as well. And it's on the notion of what era are we in when it comes to authors and fellow creatives?
Hmm.
During the COVID era, a lot of us began our careers, from that moment in time. And it was a place of, isolation. We weren't be able to see our families unless we were quarantined with them. And from especially the authors that I've interviewed last year alone, all of them began at the height of the lockdown. And
Hmm.
as time has gone on, the pool started overflowing and we just took the indie world by storm. And a lot of people believe that we are in a golden age because there are so many creatives. But as time has gone by, many now believe that we have entered into the Iron Age. And this goes back to this notion of AI as well, where in the Iron Age, there's a split between those that are passionate about building a business and building a presence in the industry and those that simply create a book just to make a quick buck, which I'm sure you'll definitely agree. It's not easy. This industry is not a get rich quick scheme. It is a hustle to its core. So, in your opinion, Matt, from your own experiences, do you believe that we are still in a golden age or have we transitioned into the Iron Age?
Yeah, that's interesting. I would like to think I'm generally tend to be pretty bad at predicting these kinds of things, but I hope that we are actually going to start to enter a bespoke era, almost
Mm,
like the Enlightenment, maybe,
okay.
where because like something I'm just starting to see, and this is very kind of just my own personal experience. I don't have any data to back it up, but I see this with my kids. I see it with young people that come to book conventions and festivals. I think young people now, because they really have access to everything and they have tools that they can do anything,
Right.
really seem to be drawn to handmade things, experiences you can only get in person,
I agree.
like physical stuff. And I think that's potentially really exciting. Almost in a way, we're going to have this like kind of global kind of system of like the internet and people being able to talk to anywhere on any side of the world. But I almost wonder if on some other level, will people value the personal experience more? Almost like we used to have when we were in like villages, where it's like one village had a storyteller and everyone would gather around to listen to that storyteller around the fire. And that would be really exciting to me if we kind of could blend both of those.
Very true. Now, this is another question which I actually got from a fan who actually watched one of my earlier episodes for this month and actually brought this up. And I think it's sort of a forgotten aspect as to why we write. And I'll say why it's forgotten now. I'm sure you have been told, through many conferences, many other panels that you've been a part of or you've seen your friends do of, what is the main reason we authors write? And a lot of them give really good answers that, we want to inspire creativity, we want to foster it, we want to build connections. But the one thing that this viewer noticed is that the one aspect that is forgotten as most is to read. We write books because we want to inspire people to read, to bring back literacy, which unfortunately, yes, everyone reads, either on Kindle or some kind of e platform, but it's a very different feeling when you are reading a book. So ultimately, this fan question and my question to you, Matt, is this: do you believe that a core aspect of being an author should be including the idea that your book should contribute to the notion of literacy and being that book that inspires someone to read? Because I was in a call with a good friend of mine who said that for many years he did not read because a lot of the stories were not good. They were not, either written well or didn't really hook them, and he did not read for a very long time. And he was saddened by that because for a long time he loved to read. So I would just like to hear your thoughts on this. big question, which I think as authors and even myself too, we tend to forget that it's not just about writing stories. We want our stories to inspire others to pick up reading and go into these other worlds.
Yeah, I think that's hugely important. And I think, that was something that really inspired me when I was a kid because I loved to read. And then I remember finding out that, certain authors would talk about their writing process, and that was very inspiring to me. So I definitely hope to do that. I think the other great thing about is books to me are like a record of what was going on, what a person was thinking at that time. And the reason I think I like books as a format so much is you can take your time to formulate what you want to say in just the right way, even if it's just entertainment, in a way that like I have a hard time doing in person, like if I'm just talking to somebody. There's so many times that like I'll be having a conversation and then later that night or the next day I'll think, oh, I should have said this instead, or that's the way I could have said it. And
Same.
books give us that chance
Yes.
to really say the thing we want to say in just the right way. And then it's kind of out there, it's captured for all time, and you never know who is going to kind of pick it up and get a little bit of a window into what you were kind of thinking and feeling at the time. So I think that's really important because every time we do that, like I see that with my own sons, we are kind of fanning the flames of the next generation of like, this is what I was thinking, but you now take this flame and kind of carry it forward.
Absolutely, 100%, Matt. And this actually kind of goes into the notion of now the business side of being an author, which I'm really, really excited to dive back into these set of questions, especially with these new projects that you are working on. So we're going to change it up a bit, and we're actually going to now talk about collaboration and networking with fellow creatives. Now, I've seen you, of course, with Jessica and Megan at the Festival of Books, and I remember you and I actually first met at, I want to say, last year's or the year before LA Comic Con, where
Mhm.
also I met Jessica as well. That's where I learned about, Plastic Girl and then your book, Sorcery for Beginners. How important is it for, aspiring authors or aspiring writers or people who want to go into, let's say, screenplay, that networking is a vital tool because you never know this person who you collaborate with on, some fun projects could be like a huge, not only lifeline to you, but also, be a really good friend down the road.
Yeah, it's absolutely vital. I mean, everything that has kind of happened in my career has been because of somebody I knew or somebody I've reached out to. And I think sometimes I certainly thought this when I was younger. Sometimes people think it's like, well, if I just am good enough, someone will come along and they'll find me. And it's like, you need to tell people, you need to put your stuff out there in the world. So, just an example with this newest book, Ashland, I had written the book. I had kind of sent it around to some agents. Obviously, I started in 2020. I started really sending it around like 2023, and was kind of hearing from people like, yeah, this is good, but it feels a little too close to the pandemic still. We're not sure. And then 2 years ago, I was at the Culver City Book Festival, and a friend of mine, so this is 2024, a friend of mine that I teach with just showed up, and he knew I was there because I put it on social media. So coming back to the social media thing, and he stopped by my table and he's like, well, these are great. What are you working on right now? And I said, well, actually, I've got this dystopian detective novel I've been sending around. And he's like, well, I know this publisher. He's got a publishing company in Australia. You should send it to him. And he gave me the guy's email, Jerry Huntman, and I emailed Jerry, and he kind of introduced the both of us over email. Jerry read the book and was like, yeah, I want to publish this. This is great. He was like immediately in, and that was end of 2024. And then so like last year we spent editing the book and stuff like that, getting it ready for publication. But none of that would have happened if I hadn't put it on social media and ran into my colleague that I teach with there, and then also told him what I'm working on. So all three of those things kind of had to take place for this book to really come into existence.
Nice, Matt. Nice. And still speaking of Ashland, What is one thing that, in terms of marketing, that you're going to do for Ashland that you wish you'd possibly done differently for your Sorcery for Beginners series?
Yeah, I definitely have one, which is I hired a publicist. So because I wasn't investing a lot of money into this book up front because it's being published by a publishing company, I was like, well, I've got maybe I could put a little money towards a publicist. And I actually knew a publicist from when I worked at this publishing company, Inkshares. She's a freelance publicist now. So I actually contacted her in January and I said, I've got this new book coming out. It's a new genre for me. It's mystery, it's science fiction, it's adult. What do you think? And she was on board. And so she's been helping me do that. And because of her, like I've gotten all these opportunities I never could have gotten on my own. Like I'm having articles come out in Writer's Digest and Crime Reads and all these mystery magazines and stuff. So it's just like having that extra person on the team is really, really useful. And I just didn't know to do it with Sorcery for Beginners. I just assumed at the time it was my first novel. This is back in 2017. I just thought like the publisher will take care of that. And I should have done so much more,
Hmm.
like press, just anything, talk to local bookstores, talk to local librarians. Like it had a pretty good debut. But I think it could have gotten much wider had I just done more stuff.
Absolutely, 100%. I'm even still struggling with marketing as well because for The Gathering, which was my first book, I didn't do a lot of marketing. For
Mhm.
Amnesis, I did some. Michael, I really tried, and Decimus, I really probably put the most in like post collaborations, and that got the most traction for my book, which I was very happy for. And it's just so crazy, like how we're always looking at new things to, you know, I don't want to say reinvent ourselves, but see what we can borrow from other creatives
Oh yeah.
and what worked for them. And one thing that I've been really happy for and will continue to do is collaborate with my fellow narrators, my fellow friends. Working with them, it's been huge. And a lot of people have, asking about my book because of the snippets my narrator friends have done.
Yep.
Like, example, Luke Bromley, who's an actor and narrator in the UK, he narrated a snippet from Amnetus, Son of Persia. Absolutely loved the character, and he came back on to do another read for Decimus. Told him, say, hey, I got a chapter I would love for you to read for some marketing. It features a descendant of Amnetus, which I think you will definitely love. And send him the script. He read it, and no sooner, I want to say maybe a few days after, messaged me and said, this was by far my favorite thing to read. And that gave me a lot of, confidence. It's like my writing has improved where narrators are saying that there is potential there. And the topic of narrators is going to come a little bit later when it comes to marketing. So now, kind of shifting away from that, let's actually talk about something that I think is important for authors to note. And I think you mentioned it earlier in your first interview, and that is, of course, finding your voice as an author and really understanding the genres that you're writing in. Because, as I'm sure you'll definitely agree, Matt, every genre has readers that expect the story to go a certain way. You
Mhm.
don't want to be too familiar to be accused of plagiarizing, but you don't want to be too new that's going to confuse the reader. It's got to be a nice 50-50. But then again, you also have authors that don't write for a particular audience. They just write the story and they build their audience from that. But ultimately, they still have to find their voice. So for you, Matt, beginning with, your Sorcery for Beginners book to now Ashland, how have you been able to refine your voice not only as an author and a writer, but also as a screenplay writer as well? So that way, when people pick up either a script or a book that you have written, they know what to expect because it's your voice.
Yeah, this one was a little bit different because all the Sorcery for Beginners books and my Choose Your Adventure book, You Are a Filmmaker, were all third person. and this one's first person.
Ooh, that is a
So
change.
it was it was a much closer kind of voice. I mean, it took me a while with Sorcery for Beginners because it was my first real novel to realize what the voice was going to be. Because it couldn't, I was like, my voice is not right. And then I realized, oh, it's being narrated. The story's being told by Euphemia Whitmore, who's like an older character. So that helped inform the voice. And for this one, like I said, it's a character very similar to me. So that was really fun. I mean, I think it's always hard to kind of look at yourself under the microscope and be like, what do I do? But I definitely think sense of humor is important to me. You know, writing about things in like a fun way, not being dry. I think I have stripped out a lot of like, my like flowery. I think I was a little flowerier in my first couple novels with like description and stuff. So now I'm just trying to be very straightforward and kind of keep it moving. Um, I also think I love like an aside. I love little aside opinions about
Mm,
things, kind of coming in and out. And there's a lot of that in this new book. Because as he's going through Los Angeles, I'm talking about like the inequality of rent and how food works and what he thinks about growing mint in his house and all these kinds of things. So it's fun to be able to do all that stuff as well, to have the room for that in a novel.
right, absolutely. And you also just mentioned, of course, besides, the Source for Beginners series, and of course, Ashley, you've also written your own choose your own adventure book, which I think is very, very interesting because that is an art in and of itself because you're telling multiple different stories with different endings in one book. And I started dabbling that as well with some of my friends and fellow creatives with
Oh, cool. I didn't know that.
um audio mazes, now writing kind of like screenplay style choose your adventure dramas, which is something I've never done before, but it's a learning process as well because you have one canon ending that you as the author write that the reader will hopefully choose. We have so many different experimentations of endings, from good endings, bad endings, neutral endings, even worse endings. So Matt, can you share with us what you've learned from that project, and is that another avenue of writing that we can possibly look forward to in a future work of yours down the road?
I mean, I love choose your adventure stuff. I love anything that gives you. So I also love like immersive storytelling. Like I said, I've done a couple of immersive plays where the audience gets to kind of decide where the story goes a little bit. So anything like that, I'm a huge fan of, and I'd love to keep doing stuff like that. That particular book, You Are a Filmmaker, was interesting because I always wanted to do a choose your adventure book, but I knew I needed a specific angle. And I hit upon this idea of what if it was like a career path? Because most people, the things we choose, that's the thing we can control. It's like, what jobs do we have? What pathways do we take? What do we interview for? When do we quit? And so then immediately as I had that idea, I was like, oh, I should do filmmaking because that's, what I went to school for. That's what I love. So as I started thinking about the endings for that book, I started mining from people I knew and things that had happened to me. And there's like the ideal that you think of, like, I'm going to win an Academy Award one day. But then there's also things like, well, can you be happy without that? So I tried to
Mhm.
do a 50-50 split of like good endings and bad endings. But I also tried to make the good endings like, sometimes it's like the good ending is like you're not a filmmaker, but you've got a family and you run a motel and you've got a pretty good life. And then bad endings, there's all kinds of stuff like you join a cult, you die of a drug overdose, you end up in like a car accident. And there's even some secret endings in that book, which were fun to
Ooh,
do. Like just if you just want endings, you turn to the very last page of the book and you can go look at like some endings.
nice. All right, Matt. All right. Now we're going to go into a new segment, which a lot of people have really enjoyed, and that is what they call the rapid fire round.
Okay.
So, first question of the rapid fire: as a reader, what do you prefer? Themes in your books or tropes in your books?
Themes.
All right. Now, this next question, a lot of people get stumped by. What is the most overrated and underrated trope in fiction?
Oh my God. Um, I feel like the most overrated trope. This is just the first thing that comes to mind, but is the love triangle.
Ooh, okay, that's a different one. I like that.
I mean, I get it. I understand it creates tension, but in my personal experience, if you love somebody, you love that person. Like, there's not like another. Sometimes you'll meet people and it's like, oh, this person's kind of interesting, but then as soon as you get to know them, you're like, nope, love that person more. So I've never had that thing of like, there's two people and I just can't decide. So I think that one's kind of overrated. Underrated. Oh man. I mean, I love a unreliable narrator.
Ooh,
I think
that's a
it's the
good
best.
one. That is a good one. I don't think I've gotten that one yet. Thank you, Matt.
Yeah.
All right, next one. Of the five physical senses, as an author, which is the most difficult to write and showcase for the reader?
That's a good one. Probably taste.
Ooh,
I
I
would
haven't
say I
gotten
use
as much
taste the
taste.
least. Obviously, you're doing what you can see, what you can kind of feel and touch. I sometimes do smells too, but I'm probably doing taste the least.
All right. I like it. I like it. Now, here is another fun question. Now, if you had the opportunity, since you are, you went to school for filmmaking, if you had the option, would you rather adapt one of your books as a limited series with an unlimited budget or hire a full on narration cast for audiobooks?
Oh, definitely adapted as a series. HBO series of like one of my books, The Dream. That would be amazing.
Nice. And follow up to that question, and this one may stump you, Matt. It stumped a lot of people. For the main characters, and we'll start with, let's say, Sorcerer for Beginners as like the test. For the main characters, let's say the top three, who would you want to fan cast? And who would you want to direct it?
Oh my God. That's so hard. I mean, Sorcery for Beginners is kind of hard because it's all young kids. You know, the kids are like 13 and 14, so I wouldn't even know who those kids are, right? You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
you'd probably want to cast somebody we haven't seen that much or that we know very well. Like, I couldn't even name a 13-year-old actor right now.
No, that is true. That is true. What about a
So
director?
yeah, director wise, that's interesting. All right, so I would love for like the Sorcery for Beginners books. I think it would be amazing to get somebody like Ryan Coogler would be really interesting
Ooh,
because
I would very much like to see that.
yeah, he's really good at like big genre stuff, like boxing, you know, Black Panther, Sinners with the vampires, but he's also very, very smart and really good with themes, and he's really good with like diverse casts. And the sorcery books have a very diverse group of kids. So I would love to see, I mean, that's like, forget it. He's busy, but that would be amazing.
That would actually be a pretty good series. I would like to see Ryan Coogler adapt Sorcerer for Beginners, and if possible, if this idea ever does come to fruition, I'm going to timestamp it here. If he adapts the entire series, I would be blown away by what he does, because you're right, as a filmmaker and as a storyteller, he's able to interweave a lot of themes and a lot of very personal connections that we, the audience and readers, can pull from.
Totally.
Now, next question, and ooh, okay, still kind of in the world of like adaptations. You already mentioned director. Now, if you had the choice, would you rather have an original theme song for your series, or would you rather have a specific song for the first movie? I should say, maybe not theme song, but like a specific score for Sorcery for Beginners, or a specific theme song or exclusive song for Sorcery for Beginners.
Yeah, I get what you're at. So it's kind of like, do I want somebody to compose like a song for the thing, or like a composer like a John Williams to do like a theme, like a
Yes.
melody? I think I'd go the John Williams route. Like, I think it'd be amazing to have like the Empire Star Wars theme for Sorcery for Beginners, or Ashland, like having a Hans Zimmer score for Ashland would
Ooh.
be awesome.
All right, that's a good one. That is a good one. Now we're getting to the final two fan questions. And this one that has sparked a lot of discussion. As a writer, Matt, which you think is the most difficult for an author when they reach the end of their project? Knowing when to stop editing or knowing when to stop writing?
Mm. I think it's probably different for different authors. I think for me, probably that's really hard. Because I don't feel like I'm a person who overwrites, and I probably should. I should probably do more writing, um, and then trim down. Although I did do that for Ashland. The first draft of Ashland that I was sending around was 130,000 words, and I sent it to some folks, and it ended up cutting it down to around 90,000. So I took 40,000 words out of it. But I would say probably editing. I think editing is like, because you could always tweak it forever. I feel like I certainly could. So at a certain point, I need someone to be like, look, it's good. It's done.
Absolutely. And this one's kind of a nice little fun question. Besides writing and screenplay writing, what do you do outside of being an author and writer?
I love to, so as I said earlier, love to go outside. Love to go hiking. I actually just went on a trip to Zion in Utah, which I'd never been
Ooh,
to,
nice.
and it was incredible. And I did this hike called the Narrows, where you go up like this really skinny canyon and you're walking
Same.
through the river, and it was amazing. And it's like when I was doing that hike, all I could focus on was the hike and like planting my feet and looking around. I didn't have any other intrusive thoughts or worries or anxieties or anything. So that I think is the great thing about getting out into nature is it can really force you to just meditate and appreciate the fact that we're like an animal living on the planet. Anytime I can be reminded of that is amazing.
Very true, Matt. Very true. And now we arrived at the final question of this incredible author interview. Now, Matt, you have worked on many stories, many projects, and currently working on new ones as well, Ashland, and of course, your podcast with fellow Wandering Scribe alumni, Jessica, and many, many more. At the end of the day, what do you want people, or what do you hope people will take away from not just Sorcery for Beginners, but your Choose Your Own Adventure novel, and of course, Ashland?
Ah, man. I mean, ultimately, I think I like to entertain people, but I also hope that, I mean, this is such a, it sounds so dippy to say this, but I really do hope that like if people like read my stuff and check out my stuff, that at the end of the day, there's just like a sense of like we all need to like treat each other a little better, like be better versions of ourselves. I think that's something that all my characters struggle with is like trying to be the best version of themselves possible in the face of like selfishness and terrible things going on and laziness and all that stuff. Like just trying to be the best version of yourself, I think is definitely a recurring theme. And so if people could take that away, like I was saying with Ashland, it's like if people could read this, it's a depressing scenario, but ultimately I feel like it's hopeful. And I would love it if when people finish the book, they just look around at the world and just for an extra second think like, thank God I can go outside today and appreciate
Mm.
nature and I'm not cooped up inside. Like that would be amazing to me.
Well said, Matt. Well said. And on that note, viewers and listeners, we conclude this amazing author interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. We have one final interview scheduled for next week, and then we dive into the April lineup. Now, I want to give a huge thank you to my good friend Matt for coming back on the show. Now, Matt, where can people find you on social media if they want to reach out, as well as buy a copy or two of your books?
Absolutely. I'm on Instagram at Matt Harry MH and on Facebook at Matt Harry Writer. And it's got all the links to where you can find the books and stuff like that. And thank you so much for having me on, Gabriel. This is great.
Absolutely, Matt. I will link all that down below in the description of this video. And if you've made it to this point in the interview, I am now going to make the special announcement. If you've been following me on my social media, especially on Instagram, then you'll have seen, or maybe this is your first time hearing it, I'll be making my first appearance at the Los Angeles Times Festival of Books. And my good friend Matt is also going to be at the Festival of Books with Wandering Scribe alumni Jessica Mason, as well as future, if I can get her on the show, Megan as well. Now, Matt, where will you guys be tabling at the festival?
So we're in the purple zone at the same table we've been doing for the last couple of years with the three of us, and the banner reads, real indie authors. So we're kind of like just, three author friends who share a tent. So it's like if you find Tommy Trojan, the statue, and walk due north, you will find us.
Yes, and I will also be checking their booth out as well. So if you want to see Matt, Jessica, Megan, and myself at the festival, it's going to be at USC. It is from Saturday to Sunday, the 18th and the 19th. I will be tabling all day on Saturday at booth 128. And you may see me traveling around in the afternoon, meeting Matt as well as others at the festival. So I'll be linking that down below in the description of this video. And again, everybody, thank you so much for joining us for another amazing episode here on the channel. And on a final note, if you would like to see Matt back on the show and possibly do a deep dive into the world of screenplay writing, make sure to like this episode, comment down below, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel. And as always, this has been the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill signing out. Wish you all a wonderful afternoon wherever you are in the world. Happy Friday, everybody, and we'll see you all next week for the final author interview. Take care and have a wonderful day.